Hi, my name's Danny Stacey and I work as a recruitment evangelist for Indeed. Today I'm going to talk about a topic I'm really passionate about, how unconscious bias impacts hiring. I'm going to pay particular interest to diversity, inclusion and belonging. Now, of the unprecedented disruptions and uncertainties surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, much has changed in the world of work. Some of it's positive. For instance, there's a heightened awareness among some employers that their employees are their greatest asset, especially those essential workers who risk their health to serve customers. Stories of business leaders emphasising people over profits indicates an understanding that taking care of our employees is going to help us emerge the crisis stronger than before. Now, on the other hand, some employers have neglected or even paused their diversity and inclusion efforts. In the short term, might seem understandable given the extraordinarily challenging circumstances people are facing, but long term, it's going to come back to haunt you, because when the economy improves and you need to start competing for talent again, you're going to be behind where you need to be. Now, between COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement, diversity and inclusion programs are more important than ever. So, why diversity, inclusion and belonging? Well, we're going to start with inclusion. So why is inclusion important? Kind of seems obvious, right? But if it was obvious, why are we still having this conversation after years and years of similar discussions? Well, what does an inclusive environment mean? It means one that's open and welcoming to everyone. If you've got that, that should be a better workplace. I think we'd all agree with that. And when we look at some data, we can see that job seekers of all ages agree the culture of inclusivity at a company has a significant impact on their decision to accept a job or not. The reason I include this data is some organisations may feel that inclusivity is for young millennials, for Gen Z. No, it's for everyone. And everyone has a part to play as well. Now, inclusion is a prerequisite for diversity. So why is diversity important? Well, 69% of millennials employed at a diverse organisation said they would stay with their employer beyond 5 years. That's compared with just 27% not employed at a diverse organisation. I bet millennials make up a big chunk of your workforce. They care about diversity, as should everyone else. Now, our studies show productivity of older and younger workers is higher in companies that have those mixed-age teams, those multi-generational workforces. And actually, when you bring those different ages together into the same teams to undertake complex decision-making tasks, the performance is going to be better as well. That's proven by Anne Jenkins, CEO of AARP. Yet, only 8% of organisations include age as part of their formal D&I strategies. That one really gets me. As you're sitting there watching this, think to yourself, is age genuinely on the agenda when you're talking D&I right now? Hope it is. Fortunately, it might not be. Now, there's been tons of research, going to lean into the McKinsey research now, that shows that there's better decision making and more innovation in your organisation when you have a more diverse workforce. In turn, that leads to better hiring, of course. And if you've got better people coming into the business, well then, you're going to have better products and services, which is what you should want, which is what you should strive for. If you've heard me talk on D&I before, you might have heard this story around the 1978 STAR rating, effectively the vehicle safety rating that was introduced at that time. They were looking at crash test dummies to use to decide how safe vehicles were. They opted to go with a single crash test dummy type, which was at 5'9" and 195 pounds. Reason? That was the typical average height and weight of an American male at the time. They talked about having another crash test dummy to represent the female, the average woman at the time, who would have been 5'4" and 165 pounds. They opted just to go for the one representing the male. And what happened? Well, as you may or may not know, seat-belted female drivers in actual crashes had nearly a 50% higher chance of serious injuries than belted male drivers in comparable collisions. Now, if you can't tell that story to your business leaders to get sign-off and resource towards the D&I projects you're trying to run, if they're just not quite that empathetic to this kind of research, maybe this research will get that project over the line. So when we break down organisations right from that first quartile of diversity within their organisations up to the fourth quartile, those organisations who are viewed as most diverse, split it out between gender and ethnicity, what do we see? Well, those organisations ranked in that top quartile see a 25% increase in financial performance when that diversity is referring to gender. And when the diversity is referring to ethnicity, those businesses sitting in that top quartile saw a 36% increase in financial performance. So maybe it's those numbers that help get you your projects and your resources over the line. Now, in the troubling environment we're in, employees, especially those in the most vulnerable groups, need to feel that what they do matters, that their employer has their back, they can feel safe, and above all, that they belong. This is where the belonging piece comes in. And belonging at work is a feeling of community with the people environments that make us feel connected. A lot of people talk to diversity and inclusion, not so much on the belonging piece, and it's ever so important. Now, for several years, Verna Myers, activist and VP of Inclusion at Netflix, she says that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I love that quote, and I want to adapt it slightly by adding that belonging is knowing all of the songs. Because knowing all the songs goes beyond simply being invited to the party. You feel like you belong there, and you can't help but dance, right? Now, psychological safety is what makes us feel like we belong. When you feel psychologically safe, you believe others will give you the benefit of the doubt. You can ask questions, raise issues without fear. You can be vulnerable with others and be really who you are. Bring your whole self to work, as so many people refer to it as. And in turn, that's going to help you connect with others. Psychological safety is what creates the most high-performing teams, where members build and learn and grow together. They push back against the status quo and really start to innovate. Now, great quote here from LaFawn Davis, our VP of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at Indeed. And she says there's a lot going on right now, rightfully so. We've got the COVID-19 pandemic, a global economic crisis, and in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, we're seeing protests and demands for reform. It's almost as if we've got the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, the 1929 stock market crash, and the civil unrest of '68 all happening at the same time. And with all of that happening, it means that clients and others want to know how to create or sustain a culture of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in this current environment. Some have called the current environment a racial pandemic. There's real desire to build a safe space that all employees know that they're being heard, acknowledged, valued, and supported. Now, employees need to know, are their employers part of the moment or are they part of the movement? There's real increased scrutiny and pressure on companies to do the right thing. Employers are increasingly being held accountable by Black employees and their allies who say it's not enough to simply voice support for the BLM movement. A lot of organisations took some part in Blackout Tuesday, for example, but I think some companies really missed the point with some of their social posts, for example. So what's the solution? How do we be part of that movement rather than moment? Well, I'm going to go through some points here. First up, don't ignore what's happening. Right now, the world essentially is on fire. People are angry, demanding change. Employers have got to start acknowledging this and take a close look at what they're doing or not doing to help. Understand what your Black employees are experiencing. When traumatic experiences occur, employee productivity suffers and innovation slows. Morale, performance, psychological safety is all going to decline. When employees are experiencing so much heaviness, how can they give 100% of themselves to their job? Focus on long-term systemic change. There's a lot of momentum and need for change right now. It's not just about a message of support or donating to a cause one time. Take a look at your own systems. How do you hire and grow employees? Do you have succession planning, talent reviews, recruiting, and other processes that are built on biases? Is equality part of your core values? Are you actively working towards change? Recognizing that talent is equally distributed is one thing, but you need to know that opportunity isn't equally distributed. Above all, hold yourself accountable for the way things are and then work to improve. Take a close look at your data related to diversity in recruitment and hiring. It wouldn't be a presentation from me if I didn't at least talk a little bit about data and its importance. Once you've got that data, share it internally, be transparent with employees about where you actually are now and where you want to be. When possible, share it externally, be visible and accountable. I'm really happy to announce that Indeed released its own diversity data this summer. And if you want, you can use that as a baseline for comparison against what you're hoping to achieve. Educate yourself. As a manager or leader, take the time to listen, learn and understand what's happening in communities outside of your own. Check in with your employees, offer support, offer time for the employees to be able to support their mental health. Give them time off. Encourage storytelling. Stories help people from different backgrounds understand what others are experiencing. They help us connect to each other. Ask employees to share their personal experiences on your company intranet, your team messaging channels, what other platforms you might be active on internally. For example, early in the pandemic, Indeed invited its Asian employees to share what they'd been experiencing around xenophobia and racism. It was a great way for Indeedians to better understand and empathise with our colleagues and our communities within, the communities we're not ordinarily active in. Hold company-wide town halls, so moderated discussions over video conference software. Depends where you are in your journey back to the office and how further down the line you're going back and watching this recording maybe, but I think regardless, do it online. It gives everyone a chance to hear from senior leaders and ask questions and share ideas. Encourage all employees to attend with the goal of listening, learning, and understanding how they might support someone in a community outside of their own. It's the best way to learn how to be allies, to move into being advocates and accomplices, and really work together to create a sense of inclusion and belonging for everyone. Slight note on that. To ensure that all employees are accountable for their questions and comments, I would say it's a good idea to not allow anonymous posting. Make outside experts available for discussions via video chat software. So for example, Indeed's Black Inclusion Group recently hosted a healing hour. We're lucky to have so many inclusion groups at Indeed, and the big group hosted this healing hour open to all Indeed employees with psychiatrist Dr. Christopher J. Hoffman. Also, LaFawn Davis, again our VP of Inclusion, Diversity and Belonging, hosted a virtual fireside chat with Dr. Charmaine Jackson, a Harvard-trained psychologist. That was on the topic of stress and anxiety in the Black community during a health and racial pandemic. Now, I would consider myself as an ally and a well-informed ally at that. I watched that session, which has been made available externally, and even I learned a lot. So I recommend checking it out, even if you think you're a pro on this stuff. Now let's think about eliminating biases then. There's three kind of critical moments when systematic human bias could unintentionally eliminate great candidates. I'm going to start with number one, how we source talent. Now, we know that many job seekers leverage professional connections to find jobs. In fact, 14% of job seekers in the UK tell us that referrals are really key for them. In a previous life, I work for Indeed now, but previously at LinkedIn, I was a referral into that business. I in turn referred someone else into the business. And most employers love referrals as well. Look at the data here. 57% of employers in the UK rely on referrals to find applicants to fill their roles. 70% of employers in the UK say that candidates that referrals return are qualified or extremely qualified, effectively saying referrals make for better talent than those who come in via other channels. Well, research shows that referrals benefit white men more than any other group. If you hold everything else constant, female and minority applicants are much less likely to be referred. White women are 12% less likely to be referred, non-white men are 26% less likely, and non-white women 35% less likely to be referred than white men. Goodness me. People tend to refer people similar to themselves. You end up with a load of clones of what you've already got. So just be really mindful of this. And hey, let's take it to another layer. Male referrals end up being paid more than equivalent female referrals. There'll be reasons for that, typically how men go into negotiations versus how some women will go into negotiations. Interestingly enough, both men and women who are hired via referrals earn more money than equally qualified candidates hired through other channels. And again, from a data perspective, how many of you are measuring this? Think about, are you linking back into the ATS, the CRM? Was a new hire a referral? In turn, mapping that to their performance. And then finally, in terms of their salary, what they're being paid and tracking it all back. It's really insightful. Moment number 2, we talked about sourcing. Let's talk about screening talent. Now, when we screen candidates, we inevitably need to make judgments on whether a CV or a profile fits with the job that we're trying to fill. And according to our research, 72% of job seekers spend more than 10 minutes updating their CV each time they apply to a new job. 17% spend more than an hour. It takes me back to my days working for the Department of Work and Pensions, always thinking that looking for a job should be a full-time job, and by the looks of these numbers, it looks like for some people it certainly is. Now, how long do recruiters spend reading these CVs? Well, about a third of job seekers believe recruiters spend 6 minutes or more reviewing each CV. When I first got into recruitment 14, 15 years ago, I was not spending 6 minutes reviewing a CV, I must admit. 2/3 of job seekers believe that recruiters spend 2 minutes or more. So what's the real number? You're thinking now how long you or your teams are spending? Well, with gauge tracking technology, we see that employers actually spend on average just 6 seconds reviewing a CV. And what can they really see in those 6 seconds? Well, 80% of that time typically is used to review these 4 things: name, previous company and job title, position start and end dates, and educational background. Now the risk there is obvious. If we make quick decisions, we're going to risk focusing on social signals, stereotypes. We're going to miss the more nuanced clues about the candidate's skills and experience. Often the result is discrimination, and in a telling experiment by the BBC here, we can see that when CVs were submitted using either the name Adam or Mohammed to 100 job postings and uploaded to 4 job sites, what happened? Well, Adam was offered 3 times as many interview invitations as Mohammed, and Adam was contacted by recruiters twice as much as Mohammed. Goodness me. Let's scale that out. National Centre for Social Research submitted nearly 3,000 CVs, this time using Nazia Mahmood, Mariam Namagembe, Alison Taylor. What happened here? Well, very similarly, applications with that white-sounding name were 74% more likely to receive a positive response than those with an ethnic minority name. I wonder how many people in your organisation go by a different name to the one they were given at birth, just because it helps them fit in. Well, that's not fair, is it? Now, moment number 3, the interview. In a famous experiment, Tricia Prickett, a psychology student, collected a series of videotaped job interviews. She wanted to test whether it was possible to guess the outcome of the interview by watching videotaped interactions between the interviewee and the interviewer with no sound. What did she find? Well, she found an observer, and I say observer, this wasn't another student, this was just kind of anyone off the street, could actually predict with high accuracy whether or not the interviewee would be offered the job from watching just 15 seconds of the tape. What's that? The handshake, the hello, very little else. What happened in those brief few moments was enough to determine that candidate's future. So clearly, when it comes to effectively and fairly evaluating candidates, we've all still got a very long way to go. Over the last 2 years, we indeed have solicited ideas from more than 1,000 recruitment leaders and experts from all over the world to help us solve these problems. They're amongst them responsible for hundreds of thousands of hires. And with their help, we've developed 4 strategies to help organisations reduce bias in hiring. And we've been sharing these strategies out with some of our clients. Strategy number 1. Focus on skills and qualification by hiding that biasing information. So we need to structure decisions so that we have access to valid information and minimise the access to appearance information. That's from Alexander Todorov's research. If you haven't heard of Todorov, go and check him out. His research is really insightful, really interesting. Sometimes I do a piece when I go more in depth on this, so reach out if you want to find out more from me. But a really good example he gives is the increase in the number of women admitted to prestigious philharmonic orchestras. Until recently, those orchestras were almost exclusively populated by men. What made the difference was the introduction of blind auditions. The judges could hear the candidates' performances from out the other side of a screen and then make a decision on whether or not they should be admitted. Interestingly, the first time round when this audition was done, the panel still went predominantly with men. Why was that? Because they all came out onto a hard floor and female musicians tended to wear high heels. So they had to rerun the activity, this time everyone coming out in bare feet, and what do you know, suddenly we see a huge rise in women on prestigious philharmonic orchestras. Fantastic. And today we see many UK organisations scrubbing CVs and job applications of candidates' names, as well as biasing information like gender, address, age, sometimes the name of the candidate's educational institution as well. I'm a big fan of that. And our own research here shows that blind CV review is becoming increasingly common. Look, a majority of 62% of employers in the United Kingdom now hide at least some CV information. 41% hide in gender, 31% address, 30% of employers hide in the candidate's last name. I wonder where you are sitting in those numbers. Are you part of the 38% that unfortunately aren't taking any of that information out? Because you need to. Great example of this, tangible example, is Clifford Chance, the huge UK law firm. They remove education details from the CVs that they review. A year after implementing that practice, the firm saw its intake of 100 graduate trainees come from 41 distinct institutions. That was a 30% increase over the previous year's university representation. So now suddenly hiring talent from universities they might have overlooked before, simply based on which university that was. Strategy number 2, gather diverse opinions. Now, great piece of research here. We looked at what the BBC are doing. They're really good at this stuff. Removing the biasing information, fine, we've talked about that already. Here we see a little bit of, positive discrimination that none of us should argue against, making sure that at least 10% of apprenticeship slots are being filled by people with disabilities, providing pre-application training to potential hires from underrepresented groups. So important. Think how difficult your application process is for some of your roles, and think about those applying to those roles. Some people, maybe at more prestigious universities and places of education, have had more training and skills-based learning around how to actually apply for an interview for a job. Other people haven't. Put them all on an even playing field. Also ensuring interview panels are diverse. A company that does this really well is Intel. So Intel have added more diversity to their interview panels and in turn hired more diverse talent. Strategy number 3, allow alternative candidates to follow alternative paths. We all know that traditional CV-driven hiring processes often overlook great talent with untraditional backgrounds. But what do we do about that? Well, a good example comes from Flamingo, a creative agency where the intern hiring process focuses on the work and not the CV. So internship candidates are asked to submit a piece of work that conveys what motivates them as people at work or from a personal perspective. This CV-less approach has helped them attract a more diverse set of candidates. And at Indeed, we've eliminated the university degree requirement for more than 3,000 of our own positions after internal research showed that a degree just isn't really required for success in your role at Indeed. We're currently looking at the rest of our roles as well. Strategy number 4, design an evaluation process that's predictive of performance. Now, this stuff I really love. Here's some research released in 2016 by Dr. Frank Schmidt, where he looked at a comprehensive meta-analysis of 100 years of research on hiring practices. That research is phenomenal. He methodically analysed the results of thousands and thousands of relevant studies to see what is truly predictive of performance. Now, his research looked at 31 hiring activities and linked them to post-hire performance. So it includes things, as you can see here on the screen, phone interviews, reference checks, extroversion, age, years of education. It's a big deal because he figured out how effective every major hiring tool is by aggregating 100 years of research. And what did he find? Well, we're going to take a look. For each of those indicators, he calculated basically the predictive ability from 0 to 100%. 100% being fully predictive of the performance benefit that would come from perfect selection. So effectively, if they're on the left, it's a waste of time, and if it's on the right, it's extremely helpful. So let's think about how those 31 predictors ranked. If we start from the left, I'm really pleased to report the single least useful indicator is age. The research shows that age is in no way predictive of job performance. It predicts 0%. Next up is a set of 5 things in the low category, including extroversion. I'm pretty introverted, so I'm really happy to see that that's not high on the list. The reason for that, I'm someone who might speak on stage at events to huge groups of people, but I'm not going to be at the networking event. I'm going to be back at the hotel ordering room service. So does that mean I'm good or bad at my job or not? Other indicators with low predictive score are things like emotional stability, job experience, that person to organisational fit, or hiring for culture, as some organisations might call it. I don't know what that really means. Now we're going to move into some workhorses of hiring. So the real engine room, and I imagine you're looking at a lot of these predictors and thinking you use them yourselves. We're getting to the tools now that really start to begin to predict job performance. You're looking at things like peer ratings, job knowledge tests, right through to reference checks. And then it brings us to our most useful indicators. You've got interviews, whether they're structured or unstructured, very hard to get away from that as part of the process. And then the general mental ability test. Now, if you dive a bit deeper into Dr. Frank Schmidt's research, you'll see that he does split out some of these indicators and talks about different types of role. Now, with the GMA, for example, if you're hiring a warehouse operative, they might not pass your GMA, but they could end up being Employee of the Month. So I don't think a GMA test is always going to be a great predictor of someone coming in and doing an operational role. However, someone who comes in and manages your logistics chain, for example, manages hundreds of those warehouse operatives and all of their activities, that is someone potentially you would want passing a GMA test. But you need to split it out and think what's right for you. Now, for the best results, the research suggests putting 3 things together. A test of general mental ability, an integrity test, maybe some kind of situational based questioning, and structured interviews. This is what we've adopted at Indeed, and it's working pretty well for us, I think. According to the research, that combination predicts about 78% of job performance. And that's a pretty big number, I would say. So what's the impact of doing those 4 things we just discussed? Having a real focus on skills and qualifications, taking out that biasing information. Gathering diverse opinions, speaking to much wider groups of people, think neurodiversity here as well. Allowing alternative candidates to follow alternative paths, accepting that some people just won't perform as well as others if you put them in front of a computer screen for a video interview. Some people don't have the tools and software at their disposal to create a CV even. And think, of course, about what actually predicts performance and including that as part of your strategy. You can do all of those things, although it's just the beginning. We believe that implementing those strategies, we're going to grow more diverse and more inclusive workplaces together. And if we do all of these things, we're going to find and hire great talent. And in doing so, I believe we're going to achieve more greatness for ourselves and for our organisations. Hey, thanks so much for listening today. If you've got questions, I'm also going to be running round tables, depending on when you're watching this recording, or if you're not able to access that round table, you can find me on LinkedIn if you've got questions or comments, or more recently, you can now find me on Instagram. Anyway, I look forward to hearing from you if you do have those questions or comments. Take care and thanks for listening.